Hey guys, tonight we're taking a gentle, sleepy little stroll straight into one of the most confusing corners of human history, medieval dating customs. You know, back when romance meant wool socks, questionable hygiene, and your future in-laws evaluating your ability to churn butter without crying. Before we get started, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this sort of nonsense. And if you feel inspired, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and whether you're currently single, taken, or in a committed relationship with your blanket. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soothing white noise, and get comfortable. Snuggle in. Maybe cocoon yourself like a medieval peasant hiding from taxes. Because have you ever wondered how people even flirted back then? Did courtship involve anything besides livestock and heartbreak? Did anyone brush their teeth before proposing? How did you impress someone when the height of seduction was owning a slightly dry room with only moderate rat activity? Did people actually fall in love? Or did they just shrug and say, close enough? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in the medieval world where love is chaotic, marriage is complicated, and dating makes modern apps look like paradise. You begin your romantic journey with a glance, an extended, lingering, borderline unsettling glance across a smoky great hall. Flirting in the Middle Ages is less about charm and more about staring intensely while trying not to trip over your own tunic. There are no witty texts, just awkward eye contact and the hope that your crush doesn't mistake your interest for a medical problem. Let's settle into the scene. The hall is dim, the air thick with wood smoke and the aroma of boiled cabbage, and you're trying your very best to look charming. Unfortunately, the only charm available to you is a pair of slightly greasy bangs and a tunic that hasn't been washed since the last lunar cycle. But still, you try, because this is what flirting looks like in your era, doing your best with what little the century has given you. There is no rehearsed pickup line, no suavely timed joke. There is only your face, and the hope that today it cooperates. You stand at one end of the hall, pretending to inspect a wooden cup, as if evaluating its craftsmanship. Really, you're making sure nobody notices that your hands are shaking. You glance up again. There they are. Your crush. They're almost glowing, which is suspicious because nobody glows in medieval lighting. It's more likely the reflection from a nearby torch. Still, the effect is magical in a smoky, slightly dangerous way. You try a subtle smile, not a grin, too forward. Not a serious expression, too miserable. Just a soft, delicate upward curl of the mouth. It lasts about half a second before a spark of ash from the fire drifts into your eye and ruins everything. Now you're blinking rapidly, maybe even crying a little, and your crush probably thinks you're having a spiritual moment or developing a sudden onion allergy. This is medieval flirting, unpredictable, sweaty, and incredibly vulnerable. Let's talk posture. You straighten your spine because slouching signals low confidence, or possibly rickets. Straightening helps, though your lower back immediately protests. You try to lean casually against a support beam, only to realize too late that the beam is not where you thought it was. You nearly fall. Nothing says, "I'm available," like collapsing in front of someone. Across the hall, they shift slightly, and your heart leaps. Did they notice you? Are they staring back? No. They're probably just adjusting their belt. Still, you take it as encouragement. After all, medieval flirting requires interpreting every random movement as a potential sign from destiny. Scratching an elbow? They're totally into you. Yawning? They're emotionally available. Picking straw out of their hair? They're basically declaring undying love. You decide to make your big move, walking past them, not talking to them. Don't be absurd. Your goal is simply to exist within their field of vision and hope your general vibe makes an impression. So you start walking. Confident steps, steady, breathing, eyes forward. Everything is going well until you forget about the uneven floor. Your foot catches on a warped plank, and you do a strange half-fall, half-interpretive dance maneuver that leaves you flailing like you're trying to fight off an invisible goose. Somehow, by pure miracle, you recover. You play it off, pretending you meant to do that for reasons nobody will ever understand. Your crush raises an eyebrow. Progress. As you pass, you catch just the smallest glimpse of their face. They're actually smiling. Maybe at you. Maybe at the dog in the corner vomiting up something questionable. Hard to say. But you take the smile as a sign, because medieval flirting runs entirely on optimism and selective interpretation. You sit down nearby, close enough to suggest interest, far enough to avoid looking desperate. You pretend to listen to the lute music, but really, your entire mind is consumed by the fact that they are right there. Within breathing distance, you become painfully aware of your own breathing, which suddenly feels too loud. Does medieval etiquette allow you to inhale quietly? Nobody knows. Then, finally, your crush looks your way. The eye contact is brief, soft, mysterious, electrifying. It's the closest thing you'll get to a romantic text message, and it hits you like a wagon. And just like that, the courtship has officially begun. No words, no declarations, just a glance exchanged in a smoky hall, destined to fuel both your hopes and your daydreams for weeks. Medieval flirting. Messy, confusing, and somehow irresistibly human. Courtship isn't a spontaneous burst of romance. It's a carefully choreographed process involving families, priests, neighbors, and people who frankly have no business being involved in your love life. Every move you make is watched, judged, and probably misinterpreted. It's like dating under medieval surveillance. Let's begin with expectations. You wake up one morning thinking maybe, just maybe, you could be bold today. Perhaps you'll speak to that person you've been admiring from across the village square. But 2 steps out the door, and you're immediately reminded that medieval courtship isn't about you. It's about the community, your family's reputation, the church's approval, and whether your neighbor Edith believes your cow looks sick. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone is vocal. Romance takes a distant back seat to managing public perception. The moment you express even the faintest interest in someone, rumors multiply like fleas on a wool blanket. You exchange a smile, and suddenly 5 households are convinced you're planning a wedding and possibly committing a scandal. People whisper in corners, peek through shutters, and hover near you under the pretense of borrowing salt. In modern life, gossip travels online. In medieval life, gossip travels faster, mostly because nobody has anything better to do. Your family steps in with gusto. Your mother becomes an unofficial strategist, determined to steer your love life like a general preparing for war. She insists on acceptable suitors, respectable behavior, and maintaining a facial expression that communicates mild interest but not desperation. Your father barely speaks about it, until he does, suddenly and loudly, usually while holding an axe, as though romance is a form of carpentry requiring sternness and good posture. Even approaching your crush requires a delicate, rule-filled ballet. You can't simply walk up and say hello. You must be introduced by someone, ideally someone who is not a troublemaker, gossip, drunkard, debt collector, or anyone known to have once kicked a goose. A proper introduction is everything. Without it, your intentions are considered suspicious, inappropriate, and potentially sinful. The medieval world fears unsupervised attraction the way modern people fear pop-up ads. Once introductions are made, the real fun begins. Supervised interaction. A chaperone materializes instantly, as though summoned by romance itself. This person's job is to ensure that you and your potential beloved speak, smile, breathe, and stand at a respectful distance from each other. Too close, and you're scandalous. Too far, and you're cold. Too friendly, and you're presumptuous. Too quiet, and you're rude. You're essentially performing emotional gymnastics, while a third party takes notes for a report that nobody asked for. Conversations themselves are governed by etiquette so strict it might as well be legally binding. Your topics must be safe, holy, and boring enough to lull a monk to sleep. Weather is acceptable. Harvest predictions are ideal. Anything involving intense feelings, realistic desires, or direct compliments is discouraged. Telling someone they look nice might ruin your reputation for months. But mentioning turnip yields? That's peak courtship elegance. The priest plays his part too. He often acts as an advisor, though he has never dated anyone in his entire life. His guidance involves warning you about temptations, reminding you about sin, and occasionally lecturing you about the dangers of smiling too enthusiastically. Still, he maintains influence, because in the medieval hierarchy of romance, God is watching and the priest is taking attendance. Meanwhile, the community watches from the sidelines with the eagerness of people observing a slow-moving parade. Every glance you exchange becomes public property. Every interaction is dissected. Your courtship becomes a kind of entertainment, a soap opera with less kissing and more commentary about dowries. Even gift-giving falls under regulation. A ribbon? Fine. Flowers? Acceptable, as long as they don't appear too romantic. Jewelry? Absolutely not, unless you're already halfway to the altar. You can't accidentally give something too meaningful, or you might find yourself betrothed by lunchtime. Eventually, after navigating this social labyrinth, surviving the watchful eyes, and meeting all the proper expectations, you arrive at what the age calls mutual understanding. This is not a confession of love. This is a handshake disguised as romance. A formal acknowledgement that you might consider marriage if everything else falls neatly into place. Medieval courtship isn't spontaneous or passionate. It's structured, supervised, and somehow both oppressive and charming. Because beneath all the rules, rituals, and chaperones, two people are still trying, awkwardly, quietly, to find each other in a world that never stops watching. If you ever find yourself alone with someone you like, rest assured that a chaperone will appear out of thin air. These ever-present guardians hover like medieval hall monitors, ready to intervene the moment you look too happy. Love is allowed, but only the supervised kind. Let's settle into the scene. You're standing in a courtyard, casually admiring the person you've been quietly, painfully, hopelessly infatuated with for months. A light breeze drifts by, carrying the smell of bread, mud, and whatever the livestock recently contributed to the atmosphere. You're just beginning to imagine what it would be like to have a real conversation with them. An honest moment, a shared smile, perhaps even brushing hands. When suddenly, as if summoned by forbidden joy itself, a chaperone materializes behind you. You don't know how they do it. Nobody knows. Chaperones operate on some ancient instinct, a sixth sense for romance, a supernatural awareness of young people enjoying themselves. They appear silently, like medieval ninjas powered by righteous suspicion. One moment, it's just you and your crush. The next, a chaperone coughs loudly to remind you that unmonitored happiness is not permitted. Chaperones come in many forms. Some are relatives, assigned to you by parents who believe that unattended affection is the first step toward ruin. Others are neighbors who happen to be bored and have adopted village romance surveillance as a personal hobby. Some are older siblings who consider it their sacred duty to ruin every tender moment you attempt. The worst kinds are self-appointed moral guardians, busybody elders who think they can smell sin at a distance of 20 paces. Whenever you attempt to speak to your crush, the chaperone leans in. Not subtly, not politely. They lean in with the intensity of someone trying to catch you confessing your deepest longings. You ask your crush how their day is going, and before they can answer, the chaperone adds, "Quite chilly today. Praise be that we all remain virtuous." You try to compliment your crush's new cloak, and the chaperone immediately reminds you that pride is sinful and modesty is godly. It's like trying to flirt with someone while a surveillance drone follows you around quoting scripture. Privacy becomes a luxury you will never experience. If the two of you sit beside each other on a bench, the chaperone sits directly between you. If you walk through the market together, the chaperone positions themselves half a step behind, close enough to overhear every breath, but far enough to pretend they're not listening. Should you so much as glance at each other for slightly too long, the chaperone clears their throat with the force of a medieval cannon. Even your body language is monitored. Lean forward, and they assume you're plotting scandal. Laugh too loudly, and they believe temptation has taken hold. Shift your weight from one foot to the other, and suddenly you're acting peculiar and in need of guidance. Chaperones maintain an emotional temperature check at all times, ensuring that romance stays lukewarm and respectable. The funny part? Everyone pretends this is completely normal. Parents insist it's for your safety. Priests insist it's for your soul. Neighbors insist it's for your reputation. And you insist on having a private moment, but the medieval world laughs in your face. Privacy is suspicious. Secrecy is sinful. Two people talking alone is the equivalent of announcing you're eloping at dawn. Eventually, you learn to communicate through micro-expressions. A quick glance becomes a love letter. A 3-second smile becomes a passionate confession. A polite nod is basically a marriage proposal. Meanwhile, the chaperone remains convinced they've prevented countless moral catastrophes, never realizing that people in love can communicate in silence more effectively than they can in words. Still, there's something oddly sweet about it. Beneath all the surveillance, restrictions, and aggressive throat clearing, two people are managing to find moments, tiny, fragile moments, where affection breaks through. You might never hold hands, never stand too close, never whisper anything remotely romantic. But your eyes meet briefly, and the chaperone can't stop that. And in a world determined to prevent unsupervised happiness, that small rebellion feels like a victory. Your options for romantic gifts are limited. A ribbon, a token, maybe a handkerchief that hasn't been washed since last Easter. A knight might even offer his lady a piece of his armor. Nothing says, "I adore you," quite like a sweaty metal fragment that smells faintly of despair. Let's place you right into the moment. You're standing at the edge of the village market, heart pounding, palms sweating, trying to decide what object, what symbolic treasure you can give to the person who has unknowingly occupied every waking thought you've had for the past 3 months. In a modern world, you'd buy flowers or chocolate. But you don't live in a modern world. You live in a time where flowers wilt too fast, chocolate doesn't exist yet, and the closest thing to a romantic gesture is handing someone a square of cloth that could probably cause tetanus. Still, you try. Because medieval gift-giving is an essential part of a courtship. It's a ritual, a performance, a high-stakes game of, please find this meaningful and not disgusting. The goal is simple. Offer your beloved something that communicates admiration, devotion, and your hope that they won't judge your questionable hygiene. You begin your search. The first stall sells woven ribbons, bright, charming little strips of fabric that flutter in the wind and almost look whimsical if you squint. A ribbon is a classic choice. It says, "I think of you often," while also suggesting that you understand basic coordination of color and pattern. The problem? Every young person in the village is handing out ribbons these days. It's practically medieval currency for teen hormones. You want something more impressive. You wander to the next stall. Wooden trinkets carved by someone with a steady hand and a deep passion for whittling. Hearts, birds, flowers, each one slightly uneven because tools are dull and lighting is bad. A carved wooden heart is sweet, thoughtful, and only mildly splintery. It communicates devotion and effort, but also the possibility that your beloved may get a tiny wooden shard embedded in their thumb. Then you consider something bolder, a handkerchief. Not just any handkerchief, your handkerchief. A personal item saturated with whatever combination of sweat, dust, and medieval air particles you've collected lately. This is a high-risk, high-reward gift. If your crush accepts it, they're basically saying, "Yes, I acknowledge your existence." If they reject it, you might as well start digging a small emotional grave behind the blacksmith shop. Of course, knights complicate the whole system. A knight has the unique ability to turn battlefield equipment into romantic symbolism. A dented gauntlet? Romantic? A slightly bent dagger? Romantic, but also terrifying. A piece of chest plate armor that smells like boiled iron and regret. Extremely romantic. If you're a knight, you can hand over something dangerous and call it a love token. If you're a peasant and you try that, you'll get reported to the nearest authority. Eventually, you make your choice. Something simple, humble, meaningful. You pick a ribbon with a color that vaguely matches the shade of your crush's eyes. Or at least you think so. Medieval lighting isn't helpful. You rehearse your approach as though preparing for war. You check your breath, realize checking your breath is pointless, and proceed anyway. When you finally hand over the gift, you do it with trembling hands and a facial expression that accidentally communicates equal parts devotion and panic. Your crush accepts it politely, carefully, with the universal medieval gesture of, "I am accepting this item because society expects me to." And then comes the moment of truth, the subtle reaction. A smile, a raised eyebrow, a gasp of horror. Anything could happen. If they smile, just slightly, you feel like you've conquered an empire. Your heart soars, your lungs release the breath you've been holding for 20 minutes, and the world briefly becomes brighter. If the reaction is more neutral, well, you tell yourself that neutrality is good. Neutrality is safe. Neutrality means not rejected. And in the medieval dating world, not being rejected is a rare and glorious victory. Because that's the essence of medieval gift-giving. Risky, symbolic, and soaked in sweat. But beneath the awkwardness, the practicality, and the faint smell of goat, there's something undeniably human about it. The simple desire to be seen, to be remembered, to offer something small and hope it lands gently in someone else's heart. Instead of diamonds, you give what you have. A braided lock of your hair, a carved wooden trinket, a ribbon that used to belong to your mother because everything is recycled in the medieval economy. These tokens are worn proudly, even if they make you itch. Let's step into the moment. You're sitting on a rough wooden stool, staring at a small pile of objects that represent the peak of medieval romance. There's a ribbon that still smells faintly like the storage chest it lived in for 15 years. There's a carved wooden bird missing one eye because your carving skills are enthusiastic rather than good. And then there's the lock of your own hair, braided carefully, well, somewhat carefully, into a small loop. These are your tools of affection. You are about to attempt one of the most delicate maneuvers in medieval courtship, giving a love token without humiliating yourself. In your century, a love token isn't something you buy. It's something you produce, by hand, with heart, desperation, and whatever scrap material happens to be lying around. Jewelry, too expensive. Flowers, wilted in an hour. A handwritten love note, impossible, because reading and writing are privileges reserved for monks and nobles, and you are neither. So you improvise, creating a symbol of affection using hair, wood, fabric, hope, and the last remaining shards of your emotional stability. Hair is the classic. It's personal, intimate, symbolic, and free. Giving someone a lock of your hair means you trust them, admire them, and hope they appreciate the gesture instead of recoiling in disgust. You cut a small piece from behind your ear, braid it neatly, and tie it with a bit of thread. A tiny part of you wonders whether this is romantic, or whether you're essentially handing someone a medieval version of a biological sample. But that's the beauty of the era. The line between charming and creepy is blurry. Wooden trinkets are another common token. If you can whittle, even poorly, you're already ahead of half the village in romantic craftsmanship. You carve something meaningful, a heart, a tiny animal, a symbol. You don't have fancy tools, so the result looks slightly haunted, as though it was made by someone who has never seen the animal he is trying to carve, but has heard enthusiastic rumors about it. Still, you hope the charm outweighs the splinters. Ribbons, though. Ribbons are special. Ribbons carry memory, heritage, a whisper of maternal disapproval. You rummage through your family's belongings, pretending not to notice your mother watching suspiciously from the corner. Eventually, she sighs, disappears into her storage chest, and hands you a faded piece of silk from her younger days. You don't ask what that means. You accept the ribbon with reverence, like receiving a sacred relic, because in medieval courtship, it kind of is. Now comes the delivery. You find your beloved, maybe working near a well or sitting by a hearth. Your heart thumps like a war drum. The gift sits in your palm, warm and slightly damp because your hands are sweating. You approach with the grace of someone who has never been graceful in their life. And then, in a moment equal parts terror and triumph, you offer your token. They take it, very gently, very carefully. They inspect it with the thoughtful curiosity of someone evaluating whether this is adorable or concerning. But then they smile, softly, briefly. Not the wide grin of modern rom-coms, but the subtle upturn of a mouth belonging to someone who lives in constant fear of famine and taxes. They tuck your ribbon into their sleeve. They place your wooden carving in their pocket. They slip your braided lock into a pouch where it will mingle with herbs, crumbs, and mystery dust. And you feel like you've accomplished something magnificent, something impossible. You've given a piece of yourself, literally in the case of the hair, and it has been accepted. Love tokens don't sparkle. They don't come in boxes. They don't cost money. They cost vulnerability, effort, a willingness to risk embarrassment in an era where embarrassment spreads faster than disease. But that's precisely why they matter. These tokens are the purest medieval romance. Simple, handmade, heartfelt. Proof that even in a world full of mud, sweat, and endless chores, people still found ways to say, "I thought of you, and I want you to remember me." You experience the strange tradition of courtly love, where passion is encouraged as long as it remains thoroughly impractical and physically distant. It's a system that celebrates longing, pining, and writing dramatic poetry while nobody actually makes a move. Let's ease into it. You're sitting beneath a narrow castle window, staring out at a courtyard filled with chickens, mud, and two servants arguing about whose turn it is to haul water. Yet your mind is nowhere near the everyday chaos. You're thinking about them, the person you're not supposed to think about, the person society has declared entirely out of your league. Welcome to courtly love, the medieval art of wanting someone you can never touch, never marry, and barely even make eye contact with without causing a minor scandal. Courtly love is a remarkably efficient emotional trap. The rules are simple. Fall deeply and passionately in love with someone you cannot have under any circumstances. They must be noble, untouchable, preferably married to someone important, and ideally living several social classes above you. Your only job is to adore them from a distance like a starstruck owl, while expressing your feelings through metaphor-heavy poetry, melancholy sighing, and dramatic internal suffering. It all begins with admiration. You see them once, just once, gliding through a hall wearing expensive fabric that probably cost more than your yearly income. They smell faintly of rosewater, honey, and generational wealth. You, meanwhile, smell like turnips. The contrast is intoxicating. You fall instantly, hopelessly, absurdly in love. And because courtly love demands suffering, you don't question it. You embrace it like a medieval hobby. You start rehearsing speeches in your head, perfect lines, heartfelt sentiments. But the moment you see them again, your mind collapses into a puddle. You forget how to speak. You stand there like a stunned sheep, uttering something that resembles a greeting, but could also be a sneeze. They give you a polite nod, the kind nobles reserve for peasants, small dogs, and chairs. And somehow, that tiny nod becomes your entire personality for the next 6 months. Courtly love thrives on distance. Physical distance, emotional distance, social distance long before that phrase meant anything else. The goal isn't union, it's yearning, deep, painful, dramatic yearning. You write them poems comparing their eyes to stars, their voice to music, and their shadow to a divine presence that torments my waking soul. You slip these poems under their door, not expecting them to read them. The point is to feel tortured and artistic. Every interaction becomes an event. If they glance in your direction, that's basically a love letter. If they hand you a cup of wine at a feast, that's basically a proposal. If they breathe within 10 feet of you, that's basically a scandal. The entire system relies on you misinterpreting every small gesture as cosmic destiny. In return, your beloved, if they participate in the tradition, offers you tiny morsels of encouragement. Maybe they give you a ribbon. Maybe they acknowledge your existence twice in 1 week. Maybe they say thank you with the soft politeness of someone who is trying to maintain propriety while being mildly amused by your devotion. These gestures are not invitations. They are fuel for your suffering. Courtly love is the medieval version of subscribing to someone who will never follow you back. Of course, the relationship must remain utterly pure. Touching is forbidden. Confessing feelings is discouraged. Acting on anything is scandalous. You must remain the perfect admirer, loyal, respectful, tortured. Your emotional agony is the point. It is considered character building. Romantic suffering is practically a sport. As time goes on, this emotional marathon becomes part of your daily routine. Wake up, pine dramatically. Work in the fields, pine dramatically. Attend a feast, try not to stare at them. Fail, and then pine dramatically. It is a lifestyle, a full-time job, a medieval subscription service where the only reward is more longing. But here's the secret beneath all the absurdity. Courtly love gives you a refuge from a life filled with chores, responsibilities, and relentless practicality. It lets you escape, mentally, emotionally, into a world of fantasy where your feelings are dramatic, your heart is poetic, and your suffering is meaningful. It's impractical, it's exhausting, it's ridiculous, and yet it's also heartbreakingly human. You said, let's now extend this section to 600 words, keeping in mind the rules we set out for the main body of the script. Below are both the title of the segment and the first paragraph of the segment. Please use the below paragraph as the first paragraph in the 600-word segment. 7. Medieval dating advice. From priests who never dated anyone. Your main source of romantic guidance is the local clergy. Men who know nothing about marriage except that it makes people sinful. And your main source of romantic guidance is the local clergy. Men who know nothing about marriage except that it makes people sinful and unpredictable. Their advice ranges from avoid temptation to stop enjoying things, none of which helps you impress anyone. Let's place you in the scene. You're sitting across from your village priest, hands folded, heart pounding, trying desperately to get some kind of guidance about how to handle your hopeless crush. You want wisdom, clarity, maybe even a little encouragement. Instead, you're greeted with a long sigh and the kind of stare a man gives right before reminding you that strong emotions are dangerous and usually lead to plague. Priests are the medieval agony aunts of romance, but with none of the experience and all of the judgment. They've never dated, never flirted, never panicked over a love token that smelled slightly like mildew. Yet somehow, they are the official authorities on relationships. They speak with the confidence of someone who has read exactly one chapter of a book and is now convinced they understand the entire universe. You begin by explaining your feelings. You describe the way your crush smiled at you, softly, politely, and the priest immediately interrupts to warn you that smiles can be gateways to sin. You mention that you hope to speak to them again, and he raises an eyebrow so high it nearly disappears under his hairline. The message is clear. Romance is messy, unpredictable, and potentially the first step toward eternal damnation. Still, the priest offers advice. Sort of. He begins with the classic line, "Avoid temptation." This is, in his mind, the ultimate cure for all emotional confusion. Avoid temptation. Avoid looking too long. Avoid thinking too hard. Avoid standing too close. Basically, avoid everything except existing quietly and doing chores. You try to clarify. You're not looking for sin, just conversation. But he waves you off. Conversation, he insists, is just temptation wearing a friendly disguise. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds scary enough to linger in your mind for the rest of the week. Next comes the spiritual lecture. The priest reminds you that love, while technically allowed, should never interfere with duty, prayer, or the solemn understanding that joy is suspicious. According to him, real romance is calm, orderly, and ideally arranged by families who know better than you. Anything involving fluttering hearts, quickened pulses, or smiling too widely is borderline sinful. It's like being told to fall in love, but only in a very responsible, unemotional way. Still, the priest tries to be helpful in his own out-of-touch manner. He suggests that instead of pursuing your crush directly, you should pray for divine guidance. You appreciate the sentiment, but divine guidance won't help you approach someone without tripping over your own feet. You need practical advice. You need tips. You need flirting. Strategies that don't involve biblical metaphors. Instead, he tells you to focus on your chores. A diligent worker, he says, is more attractive than a dreamer. You nod politely while imagining your crush falling in love with you because you turned in a perfectly stacked pile of firewood. Somehow, it doesn't seem realistic. He then warns you against vanity. No dressing nicely, no trying too hard, no appearing overly interested. Let humility guide you, he says. It's ironic, because humility doesn't help you compete with the knight who just gave your crush half a suit of armor and a dramatic poem comparing their eyes to torchlight reflected in holy water. You try again. What should I actually say to them? The priest pauses, thinks, squints. Finally, he offers, "Talk about the weather." You stare at him. He adds, "Or the harvest." You stare harder. He brightens. Or sin. Sin is always a lively topic. In your head, you picture yourself walking up to your crush and casually saying, "Lovely clouds today. Also, have you repented recently?" It is a catastrophic mental image. And yet, beneath the outdated, joy-stifling advice, the priest means well. He wants you to be careful. He wants you to avoid heartbreak. He wants you to remain grounded in a world that constantly tries to knock people off balance. His guidance may not help you impress anyone, but it teaches you something unintentionally valuable. That love, real, daring, vulnerable love, thrives not in caution, but in courage. Even if that courage includes ignoring half of the priest's advice and risking emotional disaster for the faint possibility of a smile. Falling in love is sweet, but marriage requires the approval of approximately half the village. Negotiations happen, agreements are made, and your personal preferences are politely ignored. Your future is decided over bread, ale, and the exchange of a goat. Imagine sitting quietly in a corner of your family's cramped cottage, listening to the distant hum of adult voices discussing your future as if you're a particularly complicated piece of furniture that needs to be moved. You've spent months secretly admiring someone, exchanging shy glances, carefully curated love tokens, and maybe, on a good day, 3 entire sentences. But none of that matters now. Romance has officially stepped aside for the grand machine of medieval marriage negotiations. A process so complex, so public, and so emotionally hazardous that modern wedding planning looks like a relaxing spa vacation. The trouble begins the moment your parents sense that you're of age, which could be anywhere between old enough to milk a cow without supervision and still a teenager but tall enough to look responsible. They start talking, whispering, scheming. They bring up names of potential spouses you have never met, will never meet, and frankly, hope never to meet, usually described as good choices, because their families are not notorious criminals and own at least one functioning roof. Once your interest in someone becomes known, usually because a neighbor saw you blink too enthusiastically in their direction, every relative within a 5-mile radius springs into action. Your aunts speculate about dowries. Your uncles argue about property lines. Cousins who have never spoken to you suddenly offer personal opinions about compatibility. The whole extended family treats your romantic life like a civic project that needs community input. Then there's the meeting. Not a date. Don't be absurd. A negotiation session. 2 families gather in a smoky household filled with the sound of crackling firewood, the smell of bread baking, and the weight of expectations pressing down on your shoulders like a sack of grain. You sit awkwardly in the corner, pretending to be invisible, while your parents and your potential spouse's parents discuss your future with the seriousness of diplomats averting war. Actual romance is not on the agenda. Instead, negotiations focus on more pressing matters. How many animals will change hands? Will there be land involved? Who gets what if someone unexpectedly dies? How much wool can each family realistically promise per year? You know, the things that really build a marriage. Your own wishes are, of course, irrelevant. Medieval society treats personal preference the way modern society treats expired milk, something to be set aside politely and ignored for safety reasons. If you try to speak up, mildly, cautiously, you're silenced with gentle pats on the arm and vague phrases like, "Of course, you'll grow to love each other," or "Happiness is not a priority." When the ale begins to flow, negotiations intensify. Voices rise. Hands gesture wildly. Someone inevitably brings up an incident from 15 years ago involving a pig, a dispute, and unresolved bitterness. You sit very still, wondering how your romantic future is somehow being influenced by a farm animal you've never met. Finally, the goat arrives. Every marriage negotiation seems to require one. Sometimes it's symbolic, sometimes it's part of the dowry, and sometimes it's just a goat that wandered in because doors aren't great in this century. Either way, once a goat is mentioned, you know the discussion is reaching its peak. After hours of heated debate disguised as polite conversation, an agreement is reached. Both families nod solemnly. Hands are shaken. Bread is broken. And just like that, your fate is sealed. You exchange a nervous glance with your future spouse, both of you silently acknowledging that destiny, tradition, and livestock have spoken. And here's the strangest part. Despite the chaos, the lack of personal autonomy, and the overwhelming involvement of way too many distant relatives, something oddly human emerges, a sense of partnership, a recognition that two people thrown together by circumstance and community might still carve out affection amidst the madness. Because in the medieval world, marriage isn't about two hearts choosing each other. It's about two entire communities deciding that you belong together and somehow expecting you to make it work. In this segment, you discover that medieval romance is as much about economics as emotion. Dowries, bride prices, property rights. Every romantic promise comes with math attached. You are not just marrying a person, you are merging assets, medieval style. Let's settle into the scene. You're sitting at a rough wooden table while your parents, your beloved's parents, and three unrelated villagers who simply enjoy drama gather to discuss the most romantic part of medieval love: money. Thick, emotional, heartwarming money. You and your crush exchange a shy smile, but it quickly dies because your families have launched into a heated debate over how many goats your future is worth. Dowries and bride prices form the mathematical heart of medieval marriage. A dowry is what the bride's family gives to the groom's family, while a bride price is what the groom's family gives to the bride's family. These exchanges are viewed as normal, even honorable. To modern eyes, it seems like someone is buying someone. To medieval eyes, this is simply Tuesday. Your parents begin the negotiation with confidence. After all, they've prepared. They've gathered their finest contributions. 2 geese, 1 cow with a questionable limp, a slightly damaged cooking pot, and the promise of next year's barley harvest. You, sitting nearby, try not to look embarrassed, but it's hard not to take it personally when your romantic worth is being calculated in poultry. Across the table, your beloved's family counters with their own offerings. They've brought a measure of wheat, a sturdy wool cloak, a stack of firewood, and, most impressively, a goat with only a minor attitude problem. Everyone leans forward as if inspecting precious jewels. You lean forward too, mostly because you're starting to wonder if the goat is a better catch than you. Economics aren't optional in medieval romance. They're the foundation. Love is sweet, but marriage has financial consequences. A dowry helps support the new household. A bride price protects the bride if the marriage goes sideways. Both families must contribute something. No one escapes unscathed. Even if your crush adores you, their parents will still ask whether you can lift heavy objects or provide a decent return on investment. Every sentimental promise is shadowed by math. You imagine professing your love under a moonlit sky. But the moment feels less magical when you remember your mother will later ask if your beloved's family owns a functioning plough. Your father, meanwhile, wants to know about land rights. Not your feelings, not your happiness, land rights. The conversation grows louder, more complicated, more financial. Numbers are tossed around like medieval confetti. 3 sheep, half an acre, 2 sacks of rye, a cider press if repaired. You sit quietly doing mental calculations despite not knowing how to add anything above 10. The math is dizzying. You begin to wonder if romance is just a beautiful illusion designed to distract you from the very real possibility of ending up married because of barley. Sometimes negotiations stall. Maybe your family wants more sheep. Maybe their family wants less drama. When this happens, both sides retreat to separate corners to whisper, strategize, and occasionally threaten to withdraw entirely. You and your beloved watch anxiously, powerless, like two young deer waiting to find out which hunter gets the bigger share. And then, miraculously, agreements form. A compromise is struck. The pot will be accepted despite its dent. The limping cow is declared mostly fine if walked slowly. The goat is recognized as fair compensation for the lack of a second cloak. A final tally is made. Both families nod slowly. Financial equilibrium has been achieved. Once the numbers settle, there is a strange shift. The tension eases. The room warms. Someone pours ale into cheap wooden cups. Bread is passed. People laugh. And for the first time, you breathe. Because behind all the livestock, math and bargaining, a deeper truth emerges. This is their way of protecting you, ensuring your future isn't built on thin air or wishful thinking. You still feel a little weird knowing your worth was measured partly in geese. But in a world where nothing is guaranteed, where crops fail, winters bite, and fortunes vanish overnight, these economic rituals reflect a quiet hope that the household you and your beloved build together will stand strong, stable, and full. That you'll not only survive, but maybe even thrive. And maybe, in its own strange medieval way, that is love. Festival days are your best shot at finding love. Music, dancing, questionable food, overflowing mead. You might lock eyes with someone across a bonfire, or you might embarrass yourself by vomiting next to the maypole. Either way, memories are made. Let's set the scene. It's festival day, the medieval equivalent of a modern music festival, but with fewer rules, less hygiene, and significantly more livestock wandering through the crowd. The air buzzes with excitement. Children shriek, vendors shout, musicians tune their lutes with varying levels of competence, and the entire village smells like roasted meat, mud, spilled mead, and optimism. For once, everyone is in a good mood. Why? Because on festival days, chores can wait, taxes are ignored, and romance is allowed, even encouraged to flourish. You arrive dressed in your finest outfit, which means you brushed most of the straw off your tunic and splashed some cold water on your face. Your goal today is simple. Look approachable without appearing desperate. This is not easy, because festival lighting consists of torches, smoke, and unpredictable shadows, all of which conspire to make everyone look slightly haunted. Still, there is hope. This is your chance to mingle, to socialize, to maybe, just maybe, catch the attention of the person who has been occupying your thoughts while you churn butter and clean stables. Festivals are the great equalizers. Peasants and nobles mingle at a respectable distance. People share drinks, and everyone temporarily forgets the crushing realities of medieval existence. Music starts. Not good music. More like enthusiastic twanging, accompanied by a drum that sounds like someone hitting a cheese wheel. But it doesn't matter. People gather to dance, and you join them, trying your best to move gracefully while the ground beneath you shifts like a swamp made of trampled grass and spilled ale. If you're lucky, your crush joins the dancing circle. Your eyes meet across a sea of sweaty villagers whose enthusiasm for rhythm far exceeds their talent. You attempt to smile. They smile back, unless that was a wince. Hard to tell. Still, you interpret it as a positive sign, because Festival Day is built on hope and questionable judgment. After dancing, it's time for games. These range from the skillful, archery contests, to the ridiculous, chasing greased pigs, to the purely chaotic, drunken log balancing. You consider participating in a game to impress your crush, but you also remember what happened last year when you tried to jump over a pile of barrels and ended up lying flat on your back while 3 chickens inspected your dignity. So instead, you drift over to the food stalls. Roasted meats, puffy pastries, honeyed treats. Festival food smells incredible, tastes questionable, and almost always results in digestive regret. You nibble something that might be bread, might be cake, and might be a mistake. Across the way, your crush buys a cup of mead, and suddenly you feel inspired. You muster your courage, approach the mead stand, and buy a cup for yourself. Mead tastes like sweet hope mixed with regret. It warms your throat, relaxes your shoulders, and blurs your judgment just enough for bravery to take root. You spot your crush near the bonfire, the flames flickering across their face, giving them an otherworldly glow. This is your moment. You walk over, trying to appear casual. Unfortunately, the ground is uneven and the mead is stronger than you expected. You wobble slightly, but recover just in time to avoid falling into the fire. Smooth, very smooth. You greet them. They greet you back. Actual words are exchanged. Short, awkward, slightly slurred, but undeniably words. It's your longest conversation to date. You bond over the festival music, chaotic. The food, mysteriously crunchy, and the general possibility of rain ruining everything. Inevitable. Then, just when things are going well, you hear a loud cheer. Someone nearby has decided to climb the maypole while drunk, which ends exactly as expected. Poorly. The crowd rushes toward the commotion, dragging you and your crush into the chaos. You're separated briefly, but when you find each other again, you laugh together. Really laugh. It feels natural, warm, easy. You savor it. As night deepens and the bonfire crackles, the festival winds down. People stumble home singing badly. The mead pitcher runs dry. The music fades into the rustling of night breeze. You and your crush stand side by side, closer than usual, warmed by fire and fermented courage. Nothing dramatic happens. No declarations. No confessions. Just a quiet moment under the stars. 2 people sharing warmth in a world that rarely allows softness. And that moment? That's the kind of memory that keeps you smiling through long winters and endless chores. Festival romance. Messy, mead-soaked, unpredictable. And sometimes exactly what your heart needed. You've developed feelings for someone you absolutely should not. Maybe they're from the wrong class, wrong family, or simply too interesting to be allowed. Medieval society loves nothing more than forbidding the exact thing you want most, which is great for drama, but terrible for your sleep schedule. Let's place you right in the heart of your emotional catastrophe. You're standing near the edge of a muddy path, pretending to inspect a wagon wheel while secretly watching them. The one person you absolutely cannot have. Not because you don't want them. Oh no, because wanting them is the exact reason you're not allowed to want them. Medieval society runs on a strict moral algorithm. The more your heart goes, but I like them, the louder society screams. Absolutely not. Maybe they're a noble and you're a peasant. Maybe your families have been feuding since long before you were born. Maybe they're the child of a merchant who once cheated your uncle out of a shipment of barley. Or maybe they're simply too charming, too clever, too everything, and therefore a direct threat to social order. Whatever the reason, the message is clear. This attraction is doomed. Forbidden love begins subtly. First, you notice their smile, then their voice, then the way they laugh at something nobody else finds funny. You tell yourself it's harmless. You can handle it. You're strong. you're sensible, you're absolutely wrong. Within days, your heart is staging a rebellion, your brain is staging a protest, and your family is staging a full-scale intervention. Whispers start almost immediately. People love gossip, and forbidden love is the medieval equivalent of premium entertainment. The baker's wife sees you glance at each other for half a second, and suddenly the entire village believes you're planning to elope under the cover of darkness. You can't walk past each other without someone dramatically gasping and crossing themselves. Your family reacts next, in the subtle, gentle way medieval families handle things, by panicking. Your mother pulls you aside, eyes wide, and demands to know whether you've lost your mind. Your father gives you a long, disappointed look, the kind reserved for when you break a tool or mention feelings. Even your siblings, who normally enjoy chaos, tell you to stop before you ruin everything, so you try avoiding them. Truly, you do. You take different routes through the village. You avoid the market on days they typically shop. You strategically hide behind livestock whenever necessary. But fate, or perhaps the local goat with a sense of comedic timing, ensures that you run into each other constantly. Every encounter feels like a moment stolen from destiny, even when it's just the two of you reaching for the same jug of cider and immediately panicking. Of course, you could choose to forget them. You could listen to reason. You could let go. Except you can't. Because forbidden love thrives on impossibility. It feeds on distance, rules, danger, and the lingering fear that you're about to make everyone very, very upset. Every stolen glance feels amplified. Every accidental brush of hands feels like the climax of a romantic ballad. Every quiet moment in their presence feels like your heart is staging a coup. The worst part? They feel it too. You can tell. The way they pause when you walk by, the way their smile lingers just a little too long, the way they stand slightly closer than necessary, even though both of you know you should be standing at opposite ends of the parish for the sake of decorum. But acting on it, impossible. Society has rules. Harsh, inconvenient rules. If you're from different classes, it's considered an insult to everyone involved. If your families are enemies, villagers will start placing bets on who gets disowned first. If your beloved is promised to someone else, well, that's a disaster waiting to happen. So you do what medieval people do best. You suffer romantically, quietly, dramatically, artistically. You lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining impossible futures. You craft tiny fantasies in your mind where none of the rules exist, and you can simply be together. Then you wake up, attend to your chores, and pretend your heart isn't staging a medieval opera. Yet beneath the frustration, the impossibility, the emotional acrobatics, there's something strangely beautiful about forbidden love. It forces you to feel deeply in a world that often encourages numbness. It reminds you that you're human, messy, passionate, ridiculous. And while you may never get to hold their hand, the memories, the longing, the stolen glances, they're yours. Forbidden love may break your sleep schedule, but it also makes your heart feel like it's alive. If you survive all previous stages, you arrive at the medieval wedding, a celebration filled with blessings, feasting, gossip, livestock running loose, and at least one person fainting from sheer excitement or hunger. It's chaotic, heartfelt, and strangely beautiful, in a rough, muddy sort of way. Picture the morning of your wedding. You awaken stiff, nervous, and already sweating through your finest tunic. Outside, the village is buzzing like a disturbed beehive. People rush around arranging benches, shouting instructions, lighting fires, dropping things, and politely pretending not to stare at you every time you peek through the door. You're about to get married, and everyone acts like this is their personal entertainment for the next decade. Medieval weddings aren't private affairs, they're public events. The entire village is expected to attend because marriage isn't just about you. It's a community milestone. And the community shows up early, loudly, and with strong opinions about your future children. Your wedding begins not in a church, but at your doorstep. This is where the priest meets you, recites the first blessings, and loudly asks both parties if they are free to marry. This is done in full view of neighbors who will absolutely shout if they disagree. Someone in the back always gasps dramatically, even if nothing scandalous is revealed. It's tradition. Then comes the procession to the church. Ideally, it's a solemn, reverent walk. In reality, it's a muddy parade of relatives, musicians, children, farm animals, and that one guy who's had too much ale before noon. You walk slowly, trying not to slip, while villagers toss grain at you for good luck. Unfortunately, they do so with the enthusiasm of people trying to feed pigeons with slingshots. You end up with grain in your hair, clothes, and occasionally your eyes. Inside the church, the ceremony begins. Simple, straightforward, and short. Medieval weddings don't include dramatic vows or poetic speeches. Instead, you state your intentions clearly, hold hands stiffly, and listen to the priest lecture you on duty, virtue, and why neither of you should ever behave suspiciously. You nod obediently, all while trying to ignore the fact that a rooster has wandered inside and is now strutting around like an honorary witness. The priest blesses your union. You exchange something symbolic, a ring if you're wealthy, a token if you're not. Then, in one of the most awkward yet important steps, you clasp each other's right hands in the traditional hand-fasting position, while the priest declares you married. It is stiff, it is uncomfortable, it is absolutely crucial that you do not mess it up, because everyone is watching and silently judging your hand placement. Once the ceremony ends, the real chaos begins, the wedding feast. This is where medieval love truly shines, through food that may or may not be safe, ale that flows like a river, and dancing that looks suspiciously like people trying to shake mud off their boots. Long wooden tables fill the hall or courtyard. Platters of roasted meat appear, boar if you're lucky, chicken if you're normal, pigeon if your family's negotiated poorly. There's bread, cheese, pottage, pastries, and at least one mysterious dish your aunt insists is traditional, even though nobody can confirm what's in it. Everyone eats until they're stuffed, then immediately complains about how full they are. Guests mingle, gossiping about everything from your dowry to when they expect your first child. Elderly relatives give unsolicited advice about marriage, housekeeping, and the correct number of blankets to use during winter. Children run around screaming. Dogs steal food. Someone starts singing. Someone else joins in, despite not knowing the words. It's joyous chaos. Then comes the dancing. Not elegant ballroom dancing, more like a chaotic circle of people hopping in time with whatever rhythm the drunken musicians manage to produce. You and your new spouse join in, laughing awkwardly, stepping on each other's feet, and pretending not to notice when the fiddle player loses the beat entirely. Inevitably, a guest faints. It could be from excitement, exhaustion, tight clothing, or the suspicious meat pie. Everyone rushes over, fusses dramatically, revives them, and then immediately goes back to dancing. Weddings are resilient. As the feast winds down, the sun sets. Torches glow. The air grows cool. You and your spouse stand together, tired, overwhelmed, and strangely content. The people who raised you, irritated you, and occasionally judged you have gathered to celebrate your union in the only way they know. Loudly, messily, and with unfiltered sincerity. It's muddy, it's awkward, it's chaotic, but it's also yours. A messy, human, wildly imperfect beginning to a life you're going to build together. One day, one chore, one shared laugh at a time. As the night fades and the torches burn low, you find yourself surrounded by the quiet aftermath of joy. Muddy footprints, half-eaten bread, and the faint echo of laughter that still hangs in the cool air. The wedding guests have drifted home, the music has gone silent, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster that probably attended your ceremony is already preparing to ruin the morning. You and your new spouse stand together, side by side, watching the last embers of the fire glow. It's peaceful now. No more shouting, no more advice, no more well-meaning relatives reminding you that marriage is mostly about patience and bread. Just the two of you, breathing in the smoky stillness, realizing that somehow, against all odds, you made it through the day. When you think about it, there's something beautifully absurd about it all. The grain throwing, the livestock negotiations, the nervous vows, the questionable dancing. It's messy, loud, and entirely human. But it's also proof of something profound. That even in a world filled with hardship and noise, people still found reasons to gather, to celebrate, and to believe in love. Because medieval romance wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about poetry or wealth or elegance. It was about endurance, about showing up, working hard, and somehow finding tenderness amid the mud and the chores and the chaos. It was love built not on fantasy, but on stubbornness. And maybe that's why it lasted. So tonight, as you lie in your clean bed, with running water, indoor plumbing, and not a single goat negotiating your future, take a quiet moment to be grateful. Grateful for warmth, for comfort, for love that doesn't require a dowry or a priest's approval. Because history, for all its absurdity, shows us something timeless, that people have always tried to love. Awkwardly, desperately, hilariously, and beautifully. And maybe that's the real miracle worth dreaming about as you drift off to sleep.